The memory of Holodomor made us strong.
Those people who knew about the Holodomor were the core of 3 Ukrainian revolutions.
The independent and self-sufficient Ukrainian people were a threat to the Soviet system.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center, an NGO Euro-Atlantic course, and I'm your host, Myroslava Yaremkiv. This year, Ukraine commemorates the 90th anniversary of the Holodomor genocide of 1932-33. We remember this sad date today in the realities of the new struggle for the survival of the Ukrainian nation. 90 years after the Holodomor genocide was committed on the territory of Ukraine, Russia is committing a new genocide, war. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the importance of preserving and passing on the memory of historical crimes to prevent the repetition of such mistakes. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. For more than half a century, Ukrainians were forbidden to remember the terrible events of 1932-33. The Soviet authorities did everything to destroy any evidence and brutally punished those who remembered. The memory of the Holodomor was preserved in a neurotic attitude towards food and food supplies, in secret conversation with older relatives, whose stories sounded like very scary tales. But in the end, eyewitnesses and survivors of the Holodomor lived to see Ukrainian independence, leaving us their testimonies. More on the importance of collective memory, please welcome historian and People's Deputy of Ukraine, Volodymyr Viatrovych.
This year we are celebrating of 90th anniversary of Holodomor. It was biggest tragedy in our Ukrainian and world history. The goal of organizer of Holodomor was to destroy Ukrainians as a nation, to ultimately eliminate our language, culture, history, all which made us unique in this world. That is why the scale of the crime was so immense. This is why millions of people were killed. The starvation of millions of Ukrainians was only the part of Russia's genocidal plan. Other parts are to erase the crimes from the memory of Ukrainians and make sure that the world never knew about it. They failed. Ukrainians preserved their memory first in diaspora, then Ukrainians talking about the Holodomor here in Ukraine. The truth about crime became one of reasons that destroyed the criminal communist regime. The memory of Holodomor made us strong. Children's hands, which 20 years ago held candles of memory, are now clutching machine gun, so never again. Russia understands that this memory made us Ukrainians. So they made and still making enormous efforts to stop the spread of the truth about Holodomor in Ukraine, and here it was already completely lost, and in the world, here the struggle continues. Currently, 34 countries have recognized Holodomor as a genocide. Of this, half did so after the full-scale invasion began. Russian current crimes help to understand its criminal policy in the past. And conversely, the crimes of the past show the roots of the current genocidal policy. Russia is now killing with rockets and bullets because it cannot use hunger as a weapon against us again. Because nowadays it is not isolated manifestation of protest against it as in 1930s, but the powerful armed forces of Ukraine. We will win because we remember the Holodomor. We remember, we are strong. Slava Ukraini.
The Holodomor was a practice of extreme violence. But in addition to many millions of victims, it has also normalized violence against entire communities of people. In the Soviet Union, it became the norm to neglect millions and millions of lives for the sake of some political result. That is, this practice of sending huge communities of people to death has become commonplace, normalized. And we can say that all subsequent forms of violence of both the Soviet Union and modern Russia have their roots in the Holodomor in particular. People's Deputy of Ukraine and Chair of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Ukraine's integration into the European Union, Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, will share with us 3 lessons from Holodomor that Ukrainians hopefully learned from.
It's been 90 years since the Holodomor tragedy, but the time of truth and retribution for every innocent, tortured soul has never come. The Russians began genocide against Ukrainians once again. But this time they won't succeed. This time we hold on. Today, the topic about the darkest times in the history of Ukraine is very difficult. I know it's hard to like and subscribe to such videos, but it is a way to share information about the Kremlin's most horrible crime and the West's greatest shame. We must show that we remember the horrors our ancestors went through, and will do everything for our descendants to know about it only from the chronicles and not from their own experience. The sinisterness of the Holodomor is not only in the number of victims, but also in the method chosen for mass murder. Kremlin maniacs created an atmosphere of complete doom that destroyed faith in humanity. Not only we, but also the world has yet to study this page of history properly, because otherwise it is absolutely impossible to understand the history of Europe of the past and present century. But 3 lessons of the Holodomor are already obvious for Ukrainians. First, war is not the worst thing that can happen. Resistance takes many lives, but occupation takes even more. For 10 years, we've seen how and what happens where the enemy comes. Their target has not changed since the 1930s. It is still Ukrainian men and women. The same shots in the back of the head, the same looting, the same terror. The Russians have not changed, but we have. Thanks to the defense force, murderers are not unpunished anymore, at least not all of them. We get some, but to get the rest, we must learn the second lesson. It is not to let the world not see our misfortune. It is important to record and disseminate the truth, not let Moscow escape responsibility again. Stalin's flunky journalist Walter Duranty, who denied the Holodomor in the Western press, even after 100 years must still receive a proper assessment of his service to evil. The crime of deceiving millions should not have a statute of limitations. Civilization should send a signal to the current propagandists by finally starting a real fight against disinformation. By tolerating their creation of parallel mythical worlds, we allow the destruction of the real world. The price such enemies of freedom must pay must be very, very high. In 1933, they didn't want to see millions of corpses behind the screen of shock industrialization. And today, many people prefer not to see Russian fascism and look for the so-called Ukrainian Nazis. The more people know the truth about the USSR, which Putin and Russians miss so much, the sooner the world will come to realize how sick this Russian society is. And of course, the most important thing is that we ourselves never forget the truth. Because the third lesson is that, paradoxically, it was the memory of the Holodomor that became the catalyst for our liberation from the Moscow yoke. Those people who knew about the Holodomor were the core of 3 Ukrainian revolutions. Conscious Ukrainians measured the true nature of stars and politicians by their attitude towards the Holodomor. Besides, they knew exactly what atrocities Moscow was capable of. Therefore, they were not paralyzed at the start of a full-scale invasion, as Putin expected.
One of the main missions of Ukrainians during a full-scale war is to convince the European community to punish Russia for crimes in Ukraine justly. The Holodomor is one of those topics that shows Europeans how unpunished evil can grow and transform into even greater evil. Public activist Igor Stokoz believes that Ukrainians were punished for the fierce resistance, as the Soviet Empire saw them as the biggest threat to the system. Let's take a listen.
Was the Holodomor genocide? It definitely was. According to some historians and experts, the reason for the Holodomor are that the independent and self-sufficient Ukrainian people were a threat to the Soviet system. This is evidenced by the fact that in 1917, during elections to the Constituent Assembly, Ukrainians voted en masse against the Bolsheviks. They voted for the Socialist Revolutionaries, for the Social Democratic Party, for Ukrainian parties, but didn't want to vote for the Bolsheviks. Unlike the Russians, Kazakhs, and other nations that inhabited the Russian Empire at that time, and later became part of the Soviet Empire, the Ukrainians put up the fiercest resistance. When Stalin began the great backbreaking of agriculture, the so-called big collectivization in 1929, already in 1930, a number of Ukrainian regions, such as the Vinnytsia region, the south of Zhytomyr region, and part of the Kiev region, the Khmelnytsky region, strongly resisted Soviet arbitrariness and, as a result, kicked out the Soviet party and state leadership from their regions. Therefore, Stalin and the Soviet party elite decided on that way to make the Ukrainian people obey. There is an opinion in Russian narratives that the Holodomor, the famine, was of a social nature. Actually, it wasn't. The Holodomor was of a political nature. Moreover, some claim that the grain seized from the peasants was sold abroad for gold and thus restored and raised Soviet industrialization. It isn't true. At that time, there was enough gold and grain was not used for export. That's why we can affirm that the Holodomor was an act of political genocide of the Ukrainian people.
You've been watching a special project of Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian War, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!